This is Nothing But the Truth with Trudy, and I'm so happy that today we are welcoming back a returning guest whose voice and clarity are essential in this moment. Karys Rhea is with us again, journalist, researcher, and one of the sharpest analysts tracking extremism, ideology, and shifts within the political right. Her work has appeared across major outlets, and she has become a leading voice in understanding how fringe movements take hold and spread. Many of you will remember that when Karys joined me back in August, we broke down and defined the woke right, a growing faction on the political right adopting the same grievance narratives, victimhood language, and ideological distortions long associated with the far left. We laid out how they twist ideas about Israel, nationalism, identity, and American values into something very, very dangerous. Well, a lot has changed since August. What once seemed fringe has become louder, sharper, and more energized. Influencers are pushing these ideas harder. Online networks have grown, and the language of the woke right has become seeping into mainstream conservative spaces. So today, we're taking the conversation to the next level. Before we get into what's new, we're going to refresh everyone's memory on the basics. What is the woke right? What do they believe? How do they communicate? And why is this movement suddenly gaining momentum? Then, with Karys's insights, we're going to look at where the movement is now, its new leaders, new talking points, and why this surge should concern anyone who cares about truth, about Israel, and about the future of conservatism in America. This is an important conversation and a very timely one. This is Nothing But the Truth with Trudy Stern. So let's get started. Karys, welcome back to Nothing But the Truth. You've been following this topic closely for months. The rise of what's being called the woke right. When we first spoke back in August, it was just starting to take shape. Since then, so much has happened. From online movements to political realignments, and now even mainstream conservative institutions are showing cracks. And I think you know which one we're talking about. But before we get to that, before you talk about that, just give us a 2-minute primer on woke right so that everybody can really become really more familiar again.
Sure. Okay. Well, first of all, thank you for having me back. Just like last time, your introduction was really one of the best I've ever heard in all of the podcasts I've done. So thank you for that. You're probably, if you were writing this book, you'd probably write a better book than I'm writing right now about the woke right, just because of how articulate you are. So the woke right is one label in a variety of labels that is describing a loose cohort of different kind of factions that are primarily online, and they have emerged really starting in 2015. They grew in, many of them were suppressed by censorship. But when Elon Musk freed X, many of them grew during the Ukraine war, then the October 7th, then the 12-day war. They've kind of gotten bigger and bigger. And they are a blend of some paleo-conservatives, libertarians, Christian nationalists, Groipers, neo-Nazis, health freedom advocates. And they essentially have embraced this reactionary, identitarian, tear it all down attitude, mimicking the left. So they are very extreme. They are essentially, to put it incredibly simply, they are the caricature that the left has always smeared Republicans as. So all the stuff about Republicans being fascists and Nazis and anti-Semites and bigots and misogynists, right? This is essentially who these people are. They embrace, like you said, identity politics, a grievance ideology. And as such, a lot of people have noticed that they're more like the left than they are the right. And they don't really belong in a principled conservative movement because essentially they view everything through a hierarchy of power and are thus essentially trying to obtain power themselves.
Just throw out a couple of the known woke right people so that we can all get a flavor for what you're talking about.
Sure. Well, in the cultural space, Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, these are some big names. And increasingly people like Steve Bannon and Matt Gaetz, who used to seem moderate and sane, who are now just pushing some really vile stuff. In the political space, you have figures on the right like Thomas Massey, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and then some other people who are running, a bunch of candidates who are running. Paul Dans comes to mind, who's trying to unseat Lindsey Graham. But honestly, I've been tracking and cataloging these people, and I have hundreds of them on a list. So those are just the people probably that our audience would be like the most familiar with, but there is a lot of them. There is a lot. And they have so much influence, especially with the left. And I mean, sorry, especially with Gen Z, not the left, excuse me. And the problem is here is that for people who say, "Oh, this is just online," they don't recognize that online is where Gen Z and Zoomers get their ideas. So they are perpetually online, 24/7. They are understandably economically shortchanged, angry. These conservative young men who have been told that they're toxic just for being males, just for being white, and they're looking for somebody to blame. And these influencers are loud and they're capitalizing on their rage, and they are weaponizing conservative politics. And a lot of these young men are flocking to this. I mean, and some other really well-known figures that people probably know are like Andrew Tate, for example, right? He's part of like the manosphere culture, or Dave Smith, who's more of like a paleo conservative. Um, these are also characters that I would consider part of the woke right.
So since we spoke in August, a lot has happened, and it seems like this movement, this woke right, has really become more aggressive and more out there and very vocal and very visible. And I wonder if one thing might have been a catalyst for this, and that is the assassination of Charlie Kirk. And how does that fit into this whole woke right landscape?
Right. It's a great question. And I think many people see it the way you do. Whereas, like after his assassination, it was like the cat was out of the bag because people considered him somewhat of a gatekeeper against the woke right. I see it a little more nuanced. On the one hand, Charlie embraced many of these figures, Steve Bannon, Dave Smith, Tucker Carlson, even Candace Owens to an extent. But on the other hand, he sort of shunned some of the more previously extreme factions, right? Because all these people that I just named, except for Dave Smith, but when you look at like Candace, Tucker, Steve Bannon, these people were really powerful voices for a lot of us for a long time on the right. I loved Tucker Carlson. I knew Steve Bannon and I watched Candace Owens. And I think what happened is people weren't paying attention to how they flipped either gradually, like Bannon during the 12-day war, or sorry, either immediately, like overnight, like Bannon, or gradually, like somebody like Candace Owens, who we could kind of see, the markers along the way as she kind of got more and more crazy and more anti-Semitic. So whether it happened gradually or suddenly, there's still this idea in a lot of people's minds, probably Charlie's mind, that they are conservatives, even though have completely they have completely revolted against conservative. I mean, the only reason people still think Tucker is a conservative is because when it comes to social issues, he does align with the Republican platform because of his faith. So when it comes to like trans or LGBT stuff or like abortion, he's very conservative. But there's no other sphere of politics in which he aligns with the conservative party, not on economics, not on constitutional issues, not on foreign policy. He is lockstep with the left. And same with Candace, who actually says, she's no longer a conservative, that she doesn't believe in the left right dichotomy. Steve's still saying he is, but once again, he's having like Trita Parsi on his show. He's not a conservative. He has Trita Parsi on his show all the time, who's essentially like a lobbyist for the Iranian government. So, and there's all these rumors, unverified and obviously, no, I have no proof of this, but there's all these rumors that he maybe was offered money directly or indirectly by the CCP or Qatar or maybe even Ehud Barak, who knows, who like hates Bibi Netanyahu. But the point is that Kirk embraced these people, fine, but there was another subset, right? Because I said this movement, which isn't really a movement, kind of it's an informal cast of characters, is made up of many different subfactions, and one of them is the Groipers, the followers of Nick Fuentes, who's more of the like Nazi-esque variety. He's not a complete neo-Nazi, like a skinhead or something like that, but 100% he has embraced the absolute fervent anti-Semitism of the Nazis, and he's also incredibly misogynistic and bigoted towards Black people. You name it. I mean, if you look up Nick Fuentes montage, you will find the most vile things that a human being can say about another human being. And so these people were Groipers from the beginning, right? Nick Fuentes and his crew, they've been extreme since the very beginning when they emerged onto the scene, at the beginning of Trump's first term. So there was no illusion about who any of these people are. Nobody could be confused about them, right? And so Charlie understood that, and Charlie kept them at bay. He refused to let him into the marketplace of ideas. He refused to debate these people. Not only that, Nick Fuentes terrorized Charlie Kirk. He would show up at their events and he would troll them and taunt them and stand outside and just wreak havoc, on the atmosphere there. And he said really horrible things about Charlie Kirk, about Turning Point, about using very vulgar language and talking about taking it over and making Charlie's life a living hell and all of this kind of stuff. So Charlie took a very, very strong stance and a hard line against these people. And when he had kids that would come and ask questions, like we see now, which is happening so much at 2PUSA as the followers of these people have grown, when Charlie identified somebody in the crowd who was a follower of these ideas, he would shut them down and he would proudly declare, like, you are not a conservative. There is no room in conservatism for identitarianism, for an identity based ideology.
Wait, so explain what identitarianism is.
Right. So it's the same thing as it just means identity politics. It's people who see it's people who see everything through the lens of your identity as opposed to your actions or values or specific circumstances. So the world is essentially divided into categories, whether by race or by gender or religion. So everything is filtered through the lens of your identity. And you essentially assign a hierarchy to human beings based on these identities that are in many cases immutable. You can't change them. So it's very dangerous. It's how you get concepts on the left like DEI, right, where you have in their minds a perpetually oppressed class of Black people just by virtue of the fact that they are Black, regardless of whether you were born rich or right or in a sort of comfy neighborhood. And if you're white, you're the least oppressed, even if you were born in the slums in the South, right, to nothing in a trailer. It doesn't matter. So that's how you get these various stereotypical and just superficial worldviews that really don't align with reality or take into account individualism. It's very collectivist in its thinking.
So are people who are labeled identitarians like Nick Fuentes, do they admit that? Do they say, "Oh yes, I am," or
Absolutely.
no? It's just, oh, they
Nick
do. They
Fuentes,
absolutely.
Nick Fuentes does. Somebody like Tucker Carlson would never say that, right? He still considers himself kind of mainstream conservative. So it just depends who you're talking about. But the more extreme in this woke right group, absolutely, they have admitted it. Nick Fuentes says, I'm starting a white identitarian movement, right? A movement to essentially rejuvenate the power and the prestige of the Christian white male in America, right? At the expense of all other minorities and religions. So he very, very proudly and clearly says that, the white man should have the most privilege, should be the most entitled in America, the white Christian man. That I mean, the stuff he says about Jews being subservient and all that kind of stuff. I mean, I don't even, there's so much she said. I wouldn't even know where to start. But I really, really recommend people going and just listening to him Do not watch the Tucker Carlson interview first, because that was so problematic for the very reason that Tucker Carlson essentially sanitized and whitewashed him. Because one thing that Nick Fuentes does, he's a very clever young fellow. And when he goes on to more mainstream podcasts, whether that's Tucker or like Patrick Bet David, he moderates his views, right? Because he understands that his views are not palatable for ordinary Americans. We do not want to hear identity politics. We do not want to hear bigotry or hatred. So he ends up moderating his views, and he can actually come across as somewhat mainstream or somewhat likable to people. So I would really suggest, just, there are great montages that people have put up of him just saying stuff on his own podcast to his own audience. I mean, he literally has told, people that he tells his followers that they must pledge to rape and die and pillage in the name of Nick Fuentes, and he's totally at certain moments in his decade long career, he has endorsed things like rape, violence, pedophilia. So it's very problematic. And so yes,
So
after
how,
after
wait,
after Charlie's assassinate, oh yeah, good.
how has he been given any respect whatsoever? I mean, these are so contrary to the values that any normal, regular person would have, Republican, Democrat, uh, it doesn't matter. Those seem so antithesis to our country, so or to humanity. So
Right.
why would anybody give him any respect?
Well, that's a very good question. And there's a number of factors that have gone into his newfound popularity, right? At the beginning, he had somewhat of a following because he was very pro-Trump, and he organized with a bunch of other people on the alt-right to be very vocal and very active in trying to get Trump elected the first term. But eventually, he was really pushed under the radar for all of Trump's first term because, like you said, nobody would really give him the time of day. He was banned from all these social media platforms, so he kind of went underground a little bit. Nobody really took him seriously that had any sort of power and influence. And fast forward to years later, and you have a number of conditions, a number of things that have happened that have set the stage for voices like him to reemerge and actually be captivating the hearts and minds of people, particularly young men. The first thing that happened is the pandemic. The coronavirus pandemic essentially blackpilled so many of us, is what they call it, myself included, where you had a situation where all of our institutions and our government was lying to us, right? I mean, if we were pointing out anything that should be asked about or acknowledged, whether it was COVID being coming from a lab, or whether it was the safety and efficacy of certain COVID protocols, like lockdowns, we were just suppressed and silenced and censored and called conspiracy theorists at every single step of the way. And during that time in the pandemic, there were a number of conspiracies. You had the whole Russiagate scandal with Trump, right? Which all blackpilled people further because the whole corporate media tried to cover that up and make it seem like anybody who believed that, Obama's campaign was spying on Trump was a conspiracy theorist, when in reality, we know that that is completely true. And we have all of the documents and the proof to show it, and people have been prosecuted for it. Same with the whole scandal with Hunter Biden, that whole thing, right? Remember, New York Post got kicked off of Twitter right before the election. They were active, and then Mark Zuckerberg admitted that, like, at the request of the FBI, they censored that story because they wanted Biden to win the 2020 election. So everything that happened during the pandemic served to lower people's faith and their trust in institutions to the point where many of us started seeing conspiracies everywhere. Something broke in some people's brains, right? Where they started to look through the lens of conspiracy instead of keeping 2 feet on the ground and evaluating each situation as it comes up with their nuances. And the problem with that is, if you believe in conspiracies as a mode of thinking, that eventually you will get to anti-Semitism, you will get to the Holocaust, because fundamentally anti-Semitism is and always has been a conspiracy that punches up.
So
So
if
So that was one condition. That was one thing that made people more susceptible to this kind of conspiratorial anti-Semitism, these tropes about Jews controlling our government, and Israel being responsible for all the wars and manipulating all of our institutions and owning the media, all of that kind of stuff. So that was one condition. There was, a number of other things that happened. For example, one thing that I previously mentioned was the utter emasculation of men over the last decade, right? In their in schools, in their social circles, on the media, where you have these young men who grow up with, all of their idiosyncratic character traits, and they are essentially taught to be ashamed of the fact that they are men. And you had an entire public school system that was essentially demonizing, half of the population, and that can really create a very aggressive, extreme reactionary movement. If you are constantly calling people racist, bigot, Nazi, misogynist, which is what the left has done to anyone who has any sort of view that is right of center of theirs, then eventually there's going to be some faction of the population who just says, okay, you know what? Fine. I'll be a Nazi. I'll be a racist. And they'll take pride in it. And they'll start, being the very thing that Republicans have accused them of, right? So I think that's what's happening with a lot of.
Wait, that Democrats have accused them of. That Democrats have
Oh yeah,
accused them
that
of.
Democrat. Sorry, I do this all the time. I get dyslexic and I mix
I
up
just
words.
don't
And
want my listeners to be confused.
no, of course. Oh my God. In one podcast, I think recently I said the IDF uses human shields instead of saying Hamas, and I was like, oh my God, I do this all the time. I mix up words. Um, so yeah, I mean that's one thing that's happened. A lot of people talk about that aspect. Konstantin Kisin just did a great video and accompanying article about that. Dana Loesch was talking about that. And so, that makes a lot of
So
people embrace this stuff. And it makes young men really get into the whole manosphere culture, which is this extreme movement of kind of male domination that is very, very, very anti-women, right? And it is all about kind of the alpha male and just these very superficial ideas led by people like Andrew Tate and Sneeko and Myron Gaines. And so young men have also embraced that side of the subculture as well. So those are a couple things. I mean, I could go. There's more. There's more stuff. There was stuff happening in the
I have
Christian
so many.
communities and certain philosophies that were being spread that caught on. So it's but I won't go into every single one because it would take all day. But there was a whole confluence of factors that set the stage for Nick Fuentes and his ideas to be popular, to become popular, to resonate with
So,
people.
is it your belief that Tucker Carlson actually believes all that Nick Fuentes stands for, or is he a little bit more moderate?
Uh, Look, I have no idea. I mean, Tucker Carlson, I know that some of his views align with some of Nick Fuentes' views. I wouldn't go so far as to say he aligns with all of them. But the thing about Tucker that's very difficult to pin down is that he does what Ben Shapiro calls laundering his ideas. So, unlike a lot of these other folks who will just say what they want to say, for many of the extreme ideas that Tucker is trying to push, he will endorse them and launder them through his guests so that he doesn't have to say it. So he'll ask the guest leading questions and get them to say the thing that he wants to say, get them to, call America, sinfully imperialistic and responsible for all the problems, get them to blame, everything on the Jews, whatever it is, um, get them to praise Qatar. But he won't usually say the words himself, but he'll nod along and he won't push back, and many times he'll agree.
So now tell us about the interview that he had that caused the whole Heritage Foundation debacle that we witnessed, but maybe some of our listeners do not know about that. But I do think
Right.
it's very, very important for everybody to know about. So if you could tell us about that.
Right. So you probably don't remember this, but in our last conversation, when I was describing Tucker Carlson and all of the leftist and globalist and terrorist praising guests that he's had on in the last year, I mentioned that it's only a matter of time before Tucker Carlson has Nick Fuentes on. And
So
Lo and
I don't
behold,
remember that, but maybe
yeah.
we all should. You were prophetic. Right.
Yeah, I mean, many of us were
Totally
prophetic.
prophetic.
Many of us were talking about it. We were all, there was rumors about it before it happened that Tucker Carlson was going to have him on. They've kind of had this long-standing feud where they haven't liked each other, and they both accused each other of being a Fed. And Tucker Carlson has called him, just I don't know, something like along the lines of being like a like a dumb little incel, stuck in his mom's basement or something like that. And then Nick Fuentes has gone off on the fact that Tucker is part of the elites and he's a trust fund baby, blah, blah, blah. There's a back and forth public feud between them. But many people have observed how closely aligned they seem to be on so many issues. And so they felt like Tucker was going to have him on at some point, and lo and behold, he did. And I think that so many conservatives, especially in the political class, were blindsided. They have not been paying attention to what's going on in the cultural space. They are part of the elite class. They are in their little bubbles. They do not understand what's happening to the youth. They do not understand how these ideas are spreading and getting more popular. They still believe that people like Tucker and Gates and Steve Bannon are on our side and not trying to divide MAGA and like split up the conservative movement and make us more vulnerable to our enemies. And so I think for many people, it was kind of a flashpoint where they were stunned that Tucker would not just have Nick Fuentes on, but that he would give him such a softball interview when we know that Tucker is fully capable of being aggressive and challenging his guests, like he did in that Ted Cruz interview. So people were wondering why he would sit there and just, be so soft on Nick and not even ask him about things like me and you talked about, like the fact that Nick Fuentes had been like terrorizing Charlie Kirk and saying horrible stuff, right? Like Tucker went on Charlie's show, like right after he died, he spoke at his memorial service, right? Like for all intents and purposes, Tucker was one of Charlie's closest friend, and here he is having the person on his show who Charlie hated the most and who he felt like was so guttural, was so trashy and hateful in his views that they weren't even worth acknowledging. Right? It wasn't like, oh, let's agree to disagree, or let's have different views, but put it all out on the table. And it's like, no, 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 this is trash. This is guttural, vile hatred, pure and simple. And here Tucker is kind of, agreeing with him and apologizing for calling him a Fed and calling him gay. And so a lot of people were caught off guard. And I guess there was pressure on Kevin Roberts, who's the head of Heritage Foundation, and to stop sponsoring him on their website and things of that nature. And
Just
Kevin Rob
before you tell our audience what is the Heritage Foundation,
the Heritage
just in case,
Foundation is essentially
just
the
in case.
most I would say it's the biggest and most powerful conservative think tank in the country, certainly in Washington. I mean, if you go to the office, you'll see it's not just an office, it's literally an entire building that stretches the entire block. Like they literally have dorms that people sleep at there. So, it's
And
it's a
what does a think tank do, and how does it influence our government?
So it's kind of a combination of being like a research institute and also sort of like a policy pack, if you will, right? Which tries to meet with and brief and educate uh, government officials or candidates. It also serves, to educate the public. It puts out, reports and policy proposals of, everything from foreign policy to domestic policy to cultural issues, right? It's kind of like a one-stop shop, but if you for everything political. And it's a think tank, so it prides itself on being intellectual and having kind of educated people at the helm, or within their among their employees. So people do really great work there. They are avowedly conservative, but they are somewhat nuanced in their views. They're not exactly any sort of Groiper outlet or libertarian outlet. They're pretty run of the mill traditional conservative. And they also took a very pro-Trump stance which I think caused, I'm not the expert on this, I think that caused some sort of a kerfuffle, all those years ago where you had a lot of people, a lot of conservatives that were anti-Trump that ended up leaving Heritage at that point. But since then, they've kind of generally been very aligned with Trump's policies and Trump's agenda. Um, and and so there was pressure on Kevin Roberts to split with Tucker. And instead of saying yes and doing that,
Kevin
or
Roberts is the
he's the head,
Kevin
yeah,
Roberts is the head of Heritage. Okay.
mhm. He could have said nothing at all and just ignored what was going on, but instead he put this video up online that accused anybody of essentially criticizing Tucker Carlson of being part of a quote venomous coalition. He said that, all of these calls of Heritage to split from Tucker amounted to cancellation, and that Heritage does not believe in cancel culture, that they will always stand with Tucker Carlson, who is a friend. He also used some anti Semitic dog whistles, talking about people acting on behalf of foreign countries and globalists and things like that, which those aren't always, anti-Semitic. I use the term globalists all the time to refer to groups like, the WEF or the EU or the UN. But in this context, it very much had sort of like an anti-Semitic framing that some people, pointed out. So it was just an atrocious video. And he got so much pushback for it. I mean, it came on strong and he was not prepared. And in my opinion, this was really the moment that this is really a turning point that kind of lifted the lid on everything that kind of I've been talking about for the past 3 years, threw it into the mainstream, and now there is, a metaphorical but very real civil war happening within the conservative movement. And I think this was really the threshold moment where now everybody understands that there are essentially two sides now, and two sides to a movement. And after Trump, the people are going to choose what side they want to, where they want to go. Do they want to go with the Tucker Carlson, like, grievance based, rage filled side? Or do they want to go with what I believe is Trump's moderate agenda that he has been pursuing? That's how kind of I see
So,
it.
um, so President Trump seems to have indicated that his successor would be a ticket of JD and Marco Rubio. And it seems like Marco Rubio is one side of the equation, and we don't know where JD is. So,
Exactly. Exactly.
um,
Yeah.
what what do you think
It's
about
scary. It's scary. I mean, look, some people think JD is 100% already lost to the freak shows on the right that I'm talking about. I think he's more of a question mark still in my mind. If he wants to govern in Trump's legacy, if he really wants to carry out the same policies and the agenda of President Trump, then I think he'll end up being a good president. But there are a lot of indicators that he would actually be much more reactionary, much more extreme, much more authoritarian. And that has a lot of people rightly concerned. I mean, we know he's a little bit of a chameleon. He's, shifted his views over the years. He has, man, there's so much stuff we could get into of things he's kind of
well,
said and
well,
done.
so let's hold off on that to another show, and
Sure.
we'll bring you back on that.
Okay.
But uh, how does Trump fit into this world? Because if we know that was he included everyone in his recent election, that it was
Right.
very important to include
Yeah.
everyone, and it maybe helped him get elected.
Right.
Now, in seeing and having you break down that there are two camps that have emerged, where does he fit in with this? If he fits into his side of the more moderate, true Republican that we've seen through from Reagan till now, then what happens to the other side? Does he disavow them? Does he, feel that they have no place and just split with them? Because he has
Right.
no problem. He has no problem doing that.
Right. If Trump were to come out and say the words, if he were to actually say, look, there's a growing faction that is using the banner of America first, and some of these people are using the banner of MAGA, because some of these people within the woke right have already disavowed Trump. They can't stand him. They hate MAGA. But some of them still claim to be speaking for MAGA and claiming to be the inheritors. But they all are considering themselves America first. And so if Trump were to come out and actually say there's an ugly, ugly, ugly faction brewing, and he named some of these people, I think that would go a long way, just saying the words. Yeah, you would have a lot of people who would be angry, they would get louder, they would get more aggressive, but you would have an American population, half of whom is still largely sympathetic to Trump, recognizing that these people aren't truly America first, that these people are pro-Iran, pro-China, pro-Russia, and they do not really belong under this big tent of MAGA. I do agree that some of these people are probably why Trump got elected. I mean, Trump brought a lot of different factions, including liberals, the whole Maha movement under his tent, and that's one of the reasons he got elected. But the problem is that the sectarians in this movement, the people who are actually concerned with taking over, with inheriting the mantle, with carrying the torch, they are not actually interested in Trump's policies or the actual nuanced issues. Like they really, really are angry, and they come at this with like the same burn it all down revolutionary spirit as the left does. And so they're all looking ahead to a post-Trump world. They will even say things like, I never even think about like Trump anymore, like Trump's so like old school now, right? It's like they say this stuff all the time. And so when we're looking ahead, it's when you have such a big tent, you're going to have all these sub factions that want to be the inheritors, that want to take up the mantle. And so you have to be very careful, because there's different focuses of all these different groups, and they want to mold the America First agenda to fit the things that they are primarily passionate and interested in.
So this is very troubling, what we're talking about tonight. It's a very important but troubling conversation, because it seems like things are happening rapidly and they're moving quickly and not in a good direction. And I think we could actually devote a whole show to what are the implications for Israel US support, being a Jewish person in America. Could you just, because we're at the end of our time together, could you just walk us through a couple of the concerns that you have in regards to those issues?
The anti-Semitism. So
And
the And
yes,
Israel.
and
So the way I frame this big picture is by looking at what happened to the left. So I grew up as a Bay Area Democrat. I wasn't really a Democrat, but I just grew up assuming I was a Democrat because everybody else was a Democrat, and still I started to become politically aware. Um, but I remember back then, I remember when, you kind of had the Democratic Party, and then slowly you had these few voices, and then the squad entered, the arena, and you had a lot of liberal Zionists, conservative Zionists, who were saying, it's fine. It's just a few anti-Semites on the left, right? It's not a big deal. The party is still largely sympathetic to Jews, largely pro-Israel. It's not a big deal, right? So nobody actually put a moratorium on these people. Nobody actually cut the thread and said the words, "You are not welcome here," right? The the left embraced its radicals to the point where it entered the political governing arena and was issuing top-down policy. And fast forward to today, you don't really have a middle anymore. Like, even if there are people who still consider themselves classical liberals, they have no sway in Congress anymore. You have an entire majority that is beholden to this minority, this progressive, radical, neo-Marxist, revolutionary faction of the left that has essentially taken over the whole movement and is controlling so many of our institutions. Why are we so arrogant and naive and comfortable as Americans to think that the same thing can't happen to the right? If we actually want to if we want to stay true to the founding principles of our nation, and the principles of faith and family and freedom that we believe in as conservatives, then we have to acknowledge that there are radicals on our side of the aisle, just like on the left, who are weaponizing conservative principles for their own nefarious agenda of taking power when they don't actually believe in those things. And we need to say no. Everybody needs to say no. Quit with this stuff about like cancellation. It is not canceling to recognize that some people are just not really conservatives who say they are. We're not saying you should lose your job. We're not saying you should lose your platform. We're not saying you shouldn't have a voice. We're just saying you're not part of the conservative movement because you don't believe in what we believe in, right? And it's not about specific issues. It's about fundamental values, fundamental conservative values. And so I think if we are not careful, then I really, really do believe that if we make the same mistake as the left did and we actually embrace these people, that more and more of them are going to get elected into Congress. We're going to have more and more of them in the bureaucracy and in the administration. And 10 years down the line, you could see a Republican Party that is essentially an anti-Semitic party, just like the left.
Wow. What a fascinating and important conversation. Karys, this has been fascinating. Such a timely one also. We've been tracking this trend since August with you, and tonight we took a hard line and a hard look at where the woke right has gone since then, how it's evolved, how it's spreading, what it means for the future of conservatism, free speech, moral clarity in America. But perhaps most critically, also, we explored how this shift is impacting the Jewish community here at home and how anti Semitic narratives have begun to seep into the corners of our political right, which once stood very firmly with Israel, and what it means for the U.S. Israel relationship going forward. Very sad indeed. Karys, thank you so much for your insight, your courage, your continued commitment to exposing this dangerous trend. You always bring clarity, depth, and honesty to these discussions, and I'm so glad to have you back on the show.
Thank you
To
very
our
much.
listeners, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for speaking up and for standing up and for not just letting us know about it, but you're writing a book. Tell us about your book.
Yeah, I'm writing this book about it. I quit my job in August to focus full time on this. It'll be out sometime in 2026. The publishers want it in February, but they know that's not going to happen. And also since all this stuff with heritage, since all that blew up, I've honestly been spending less time writing the book and more time actually getting more politically involved and trying to brief and train and guide everybody from Congress members to influencers to students about what is going on here. Because like I said, many people were blindsided. They don't understand how this happened. They don't understand the many factors and the many philosophies that have led up to this, and they don't understand how to properly address it. And many of them are addressing it the wrong way. So if anybody, watching this wants me to come speak to their synagogues or their political groups or their communities, or just wants help, putting together some materials for how to counter some of these right-wing anti-Semitic tropes, or how to really make people see that there are some influencers and figures that are posturing under the guise of America First, who are really not America First at all. Please feel free to reach out, because I'm doing this full time now. This is pretty much my life, is this crusade.
Wow. Thank you so much. Thank you on behalf of all of us. Thank you for the Jewish people, for Israel, and for conservatives across this country. Thank you so much. To our listeners, thank you for joining us. This has been Nothing But the Truth. You can catch us every Thursday night at 9:30 p.m. on the radio. And if you missed any part of this show or want to listen to any of our past episodes, you can find Nothing But the Truth wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, stay strong, stay informed, and keep seeking nothing but the truth.